Hello, football fans. Welcome to another episode of Talking Tactics with Lloyd. Today, our focus point is on the Premier League, the best league in the world, starting tomorrow. Let's sit back and enjoy as we dive into tactics of the traditional top six: Arsenal, two Manchester teams, Chelsea, Tottenham, and Liverpool. Let's go right into it. So we're looking at Arsenal being the defending champion, Arteta still at the helm, Manchester United and Tottenham continuing with Michael Carrick and Robert De Zerbi respectively, and then the three teams with new managers or new coaches: Chelsea with Xabi Alonso, Manchester City with Enzo Maresca, and Liverpool with Andoni Iraola. This season promise or looks rather on paper to be one of the fascinating seasons in terms of tactics and personnel, with various systems being deployed by various coaches. So the question we should be asking today, rather, would be which team is tactically prepared to win the Premier League. So let's get into it. First it's Arsenal, the system to beat. Manager Mikel Arteta. Let's start with the champions. Arsenal's biggest advantage this season isn't simply their quality, it's rather continuity. While their rivals are adapting to new managers and new tactical ideas, Arteta already knows exactly what he wants from his team. We can expect Arsenal to continue operating from a 4-3-3 system or 4-2-3-1 structure, but don't be fooled by the formation on the team sheet. In position, Arsenal can become much more fluid. One fullback can move inside, the midfield can rotate, the wingers can hold the width, and the central midfielders can attack the space around the opposition defensive line. Key tactical principle would be controlling the game before trying to win the game. Arsenal want to dominate territory, position, and field positions. Their pressing structure is also very important in their model. When you look into their midfield, most likely this season they would go with a double pivot of Bruno Gamires and Declan Rice, with Martin Odegaard playing as a 10. Or they can switch it up. Bruno becomes a single pivot and Declan Rice plays from number 8 position on the left side of the midfield. So it can be a 4-3-3 or it can be a 4-2-3-1. So going on, when their pressing structure is also important, that's when you need Martin Odegaard with Declan Rice supporting either of Saka and the new signing Tolis to press from the front. So Arsenal, when they lose the ball, they want to win it back immediately, preventing the opposition from launching dangerous transitions. And as I mentioned, the arrival of Bruno Gamires gives Arteta another option in midfield, particularly when Arsenal need physicality, ball recovery, and progressive passing. So the question would remain, or the question would rather ask would be, can Arsenal become less predictable? Because last season there were moments when the attacking structure became easier for opponents to read. If Mikel Arteta can add more unpredictability to the final third, it's a scary message for the rest of the English Premier League teams. Arsenal could be even more dangerous. So my verdict on Arsenal would be that Arsenal have the most important technical advantage of all. They don't need to reinvent themselves. They can continue with the system that they've been using last season, just fine-tuning few small details, especially with the addition of two key signings in the form of Tolis playing from the left side and Bruno Gamires playing from center midfield, or a defensive midfield rather. So those are two key signings for me that can propel Arsenal to back-to-back champions. Just shared a few insight on how Arsenal are looking ahead of the new season. there isn't really much to change in terms of what they've been doing. It seems to have worked, winning the English Premier League and getting to the final of the Champions League. So for such a team, really, you can't ask for more, or you can't question maybe their tactics. Yeah, they just need to evolve, not necessarily to make wholesome changes, but will look into how the rest of the other teams potentially would be looking like, or their managers rather, would be intending to employ various tactics into the new season. So, in second position, we look into Manchester City. So, looking at Manchester City, life after Pep Guardiola, that's just a simple explanation. New manager Enzo Maresca. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting. Manchester City without Pep Guardiola. Think about that. For years, City's identity has been built around positional play, control, aggressive counter-pressing, and creating numerical superiority all over the pitch. But now comes a completely different challenge. How does Enzo Maresca build his Manchester City? Knowing Enzo Maresca from his period as a Chelsea coach, we can expect a position based approach, but the interesting question is how Enzo balances control with verticality. A possible structure would be a 4-3-3, which can transform into a 3-2-4-1 during position. So I just quickly made a visuals or a demonstration where Enzo's teams have shown to prefer this system in formation, in position rather. So you've got a three-man defense where traditionally one of your fullbacks, but most predominantly looks like it's gonna be O'Reilly from Manchester City or Guardiola. Three-man defense, and then having one of the fullback joining in the defensive midfielder to make a two-man midfield, and then having the number 8 and the number 10 as a box midfield. So you would have 3-4-3 formation when the team it's in position. But obviously, once the team loses position, you would expect O'Reilly to move back into his fullback position. So going into more detail, one fullback can move inside, as I mentioned, and the midfield can create a double pivot where you most likely gonna have either of Kovacic and O'Reilly, or the new signing Elliot Anderson can play as a number 6 together with his England teammate, and then you can have either of a Phil Foden and a Cherky as your two number 10s, or perhaps maybe you can go with a cautious approach, having Cherky with either of Elliot or Kovacic as well. So different dynamics, they can be altered as how and depending on the opposition. So looking into that, the attacking midfielders would occupy the half space, as I mentioned, and the wingers would be staying out wide. So most likely two wingers into Enzo Maresca's system. You are looking into Semenyo playing from the right, and Jeremy Doku coming from the left hand side, and up front, of course, being Ellen Haaland. So that's where the technical question would be: which midfield, or who controls the midfield in this case? Of course, we know Rodri's departure around the squad. City have lost one of the key players who gave Pep Guardiola's system extraordinary control. So Enzo will have a difficult job on his end, rather, to ensure that he can create a new machine for control and relying on transitions. He simply cannot rely on position. That need will need to be revisited or checked. So he's gonna need his defense to be resolute. That means when City attack with numbers, they must still have enough players behind the ball to stop counter-attacks. And with Ellen Haaland up front, City have something very important, a direct attacking weapon. As I mentioned, they can go direct from the goalkeeper or from the defense to Ellen with his physicality, and they can go using the width on the side by means of crossing or playing the ball in between the defensive line. So they can alternate really their style of play or how they prefer to go on attack. Yeah, so one would wonder that perhaps the new city would be slightly more vertical than the position based approach that has been synonymous under Pep Guardiola. Less about passing for the sake of control and more about using position to create the moment for Alan to attack the space. The biggest question would not be whether Maresco can coach Man City, it's whether he can create a new identity without simply trying to copy what his successor Pep Guardiola did. So that's basically expect a similar formation in structure for Man City this coming season, where you will have 3-4-3 or 4-3-3 or 3-2-2 or one formation when the team is in position and when they are defending, of course. So yeah, I've just shared insight on the two top teams from last season. So like I said, we are not giving this top six in any numerical, I mean, a chronicle order or how the team finished last season. It's just your traditional top six in the England Premier League. So in third position, we will be looking into Liverpool. Yeah, the Reds. I think this one is going to be fascinating. Let's get into it. Yeah, Liverpool new era comes into this season. Of course, we saw and we know what happened to Arne Slot 12 months after delivering their first Premier League in many seasons. So a big challenge and big shoes to fill for Andioni Areola, who come at the back of one could say a relative success down under Bournemouth, where he delivered sixth finish place, the best ever season in their history. So he comes highly rated, and of course, being a Spanish, seeing how fellow Spanish coaches have fared in the English Premier League, a lot would be expected from him. So let's look into how his team and how his tactics really can work for Liverpool. So the big question is, what does Liverpool look like without the previous managerial structure? Andoni Araola brings an aggressive football philosophy. Expect intensity, expect pressing, expect vertical attacks, and expect Liverpool to try and win the ball up high in the pitch. A potential base formation would be a 4-3-3, but the important part is what happens after the ball is won. So, looking into a 4-3-3 system, I think you can interpret it in this manner. So you have your four defense line and your three midfielders and your three forward players. But like I said, this can be interpreted differently. Looking at the personnel of Liverpool players, you are looking at someone like Florian Wirtz, who this season would be expected to play maybe in an attacking midfield or a number 10, as it commonly known. So you're expecting maybe Liverpool to also line up in a 4-2-3-1 formation. So a double pivot with a number 10 with two wingers flanked opposite side, and a single number 9 up top. But like I said, we are just predicting at this stage. We haven't really seen how the team will show up, but we are expecting more or less this system or a 4-3-3 in structure. So going into more detail about the system would be Liverpool could transition extremely quickly, defender to midfield, midfield to winger, winger are taking the space, striker are taking the box. So in theory or in simple terms, you're expecting a Van Dijk in position to play the ball through to one of his wingers, or rather playing maybe one of his pivots. Most likely gonna be Soberslide or a Gravenberch in this side, or they can play the either of Soberslide with McAllister or Gravenberch with McAllister. But we're expecting quick football from Liverpool, so Van Dijk can play direct long, or the recent signing being the loanee from Barcelona, Araujo, can also play from the back and play long directly to Florian Wirtz through the channels or through to Isak up front as a number 9. So those are the weapons that Liverpool can use. 3 or 4 passes and suddenly you are facing your own goal. That's where Liverpool, I feel, can be more dangerous. But high risk, high reward, I guess. There's also a risk involved. Aggressive pressing, we know Ariola's teams, they press from the front. So you're expecting a high line defensive structure where they're going to be playing 20 meters away from the goal. Therefore, offensive players would be expected to press. Wirtz and 2 of the wingers would be expected to support Isak when he does the pressing, and also ensure that the 2 midfielders, they do not leave spaces in behind, so it becomes a compact team when the team is out of position. So those are just one of the risk involved. And if the first press is beaten, Liverpool defenders can suddenly be exposed in large spaces. Van Dijk is way past his best at this point, so you don't expect, or you wouldn't rather want to have a space this big with an Ellen Haaland running through the channels against an aging Van Dijk. So Liverpool will have to be extremely cautious out of position with this high intensity and high football. So the question would be, how aggressive can Liverpool be without becoming vulnerable? Against the best Premier League teams, that question could determine whether Liverpool challenge for the title or simply fight for Champions League qualification. Liverpool could become one of the most entertaining teams in the league, but their defensive transition will tell us everything. So yeah, Andoni Orola, good luck and welcome to Merseyside. It's not gonna be easy to bring back the high gen pressing method or style that was synonymous with Jurgen Klopp. So yeah, expectations are high, of course, being a top team, but also there's short of depth, I think, in the Liverpool squad. Yes, they can have a solid starting 11, but I feel they are thin, especially in wide areas. Perhaps a reinforcement or 2 can really propel them to a Premier League fight and a Champions League somewhere going the distance. So yeah, that's it on Liverpool. And going on our fourth team, another interesting team, Chelsea Football Club, the Xabi Alonso project. So we will break or share insight on what to expect on Xabi Alonso and his team, and also look into the systems, or the system rather, that he would be most likely deploying, which from his time as Bayern Leverkusen coach showed that 3-4-3, 3-5-2 interpretation still have room in today's football. Although his tenure with Real Madrid didn't bring much success, but he remains a good coach in my view. So let's dive into Chelsea, the Xavi Alonso project. So yeah, now Chelsea. This could be one of the most tactically intriguing teams in the league. Xavi Alonso has already Xavi Alonso has already established a reputation for flexible positional football. Expect Chelsea to move between structures rather than remain locked into one formation. A 3-4-3 or a 3-4-2-1 could be particularly useful. So, back to the tactic board. This, in theory, is just a small demonstration of how a 3-4-3 system would look like on paper. So you would have three center backs with two wing backs, one defensive midfielder with two number 10s, and two strikers. But as I mentioned, this can be altered into a 3-4-2-1 system, or 3-4-3 rather, if you prefer. But looking at the personnel of Chelsea players, he's also flexible enough, or he's got the right type of players to play 4-2-3-1 formation using. When you go 4-2-3-1, you can use someone like Caicedo with Enzo Fernandez as your double pivot, Cole Palmer as your number 10. From the left or from the right hand side, you can have the new signing Morgan Rogers, and then Pedro Neto from your left side, and up top have Joao Pedro. So the formation rather, it's just on paper, but they are flexible enough to interchange it as and when it demands, or depending on the opponents really. So let's look into that. Three defenders provide security, wing backs provide width, as I mentioned. Your right wing back most likely would be captain Rhys James, and your left wing back would be the new signing. So two attacking midfielders, Cole Palmer with his friend Morgan Rogers, can play in that and operate between the lines or the channels. And a strike, of course, number 9 being Joao Pedro, who can occupy the centre back. But here's an interesting part. Chelsea has enough or enormous attacking talent in my view. The question isn't really can Chelsea create chances, would be rather can Alonso organize the team when Chelsea lose the ball, because modern football isn't only about position, it's about what happens 5 seconds after the position is lost. So Chelsea would need a strong counter press. The likes of Pamela and Rogers, Pedro Neto would need to support, or would need to be aggressive in their pressing when the team is out of position. We know Enzo Fernandez and Caicedo, they are very physical in midfield, and the defense, Colwell should be back from injury, playing as the left centre back, will also be pushing up high to ensure that the team remain closer in distance and do not allow gaps in between the midfield and the defense. So they will need to be compact distance between the lines, and they will need the midfield to understand when to attack and when to protect. Chelsea also have one potential advantage this season. They don't have any European competition to participate in, so that could allow Coach Alonso to train his tactical ideas more consistently, and keep the squad fresher. So yeah, expecting a Chelsea team to be a wild card this season in terms of a top 6 finish. So if Coach Alonso can get the structure right, they could surprise a lot of people. So yeah, watch out for Chelsea, the Blues. They always say they are the best team in London. So Yeah, let's see what the season brings for them. Next one. In fifth place, our beloved, or my beloved Red Devils, Manchester United. Michael Carrick, the evolution. Let's get into that as well. Yeah, we all know United finished third last season, so Michael Carrick gets another opportunity to build his own team for a full season. And technically, I think one area that it's under the microscope would be midfield. For obvious reasons, he was a midfielder in his days, and we've just lost one of the big personalities and top players in the team, Casemiro, having left for MLS. So yeah, we're gonna see what our midfield looks like this season. So United or Manchester United still have the talisman in their books. The best player in the Premier League last season, Bruno Fernandes, the captain, and they've added two midfielders so far, Yuri Telemans and Andrea Santos, from Aston Villa and Chelsea respectively. So there have been talks as well of Carlos Balena from Brighton having signed up. So things are looking, yeah, promising. So that gives Michael Carrick different possibilities in midfield rather, where he last season he played Casemiro with Mainu as his double pivot. So you are expecting a 4-2-3-1 formation to remain in place. I believe this is one of the common formations in EPL rather, not modern football only, because some of the European teams they play differently. But yeah, majority of the English teams they prefer this system. So once again, you have a four-man defense, two double pivots or two center midfielders, and an attacking midfielder number 10, supported by the two wingers, and up front a number 10. I mean a number 9. So in Manchester United case, you most likely gonna have your first choice being Lehman's two centre back when they are fit. I think Maguire and Lisandro Martinez take the spot, and on the fullbacks position, you can go with the more offensive Dalot, or maybe a more defensive minded Marazwai from a left back position. We saw last season Luke Shaw playing all season without being injured. So he can continue in that vein, and midfield is where it gets interesting. So with the two signings being Telemans and Santos, you can either start the two or you can play Telemans with his experience and partner him with a main if you want midfield control. But if you want a guile and pressing, perhaps maybe you can use Santos in this position. And then going up front, you have Mbeu together with Ahmad being flanked by Bruno in the number 10 and our number 9 being Sesko. So that's basically the team in nutshell. But we will get into more detail how Michael Carrick can interchange or can use his weapon differently. So yeah, I mentioned 4-2-3-1, which could be the system that Michael Carrick continues with, but he can also move towards a 4-3-3, giving Bruno greater freedom while creating more stability behind him. The key is balance, because United cannot expect Bruno to solve every problem alone. They need players capable of progressing the ball, protecting the defense, and controlling transition as well. And then there is the pressing question. I did mention Mbemu, Bruno, either Cunha on Ahmad and Cisco. They will need to press collectively. You don't want a situation where you've got Esesco pressing the opposition defenders alone. So the three men behind him, they will need to be in synchronization and support when the team is out of position. And of course, you're expecting that the opposition does not play through them. So United, we know they have the attacking quality, but if Michael Carrick can work his magic and build a reliable midfield structure, why not? United can become a serious problem for the rest of the top six and even the rest of the league, in my view. So yeah, that's Michael Carrick and his Manchester United evolution. So last we've got Tottenham. Yeah, Tottenham Hotspurs. The Robert De Zerbi experiment we saw towards end of last season. He came in when Spurs were lacking in the relegation battle, almost got relegated, and right at the end managed to secure required points and save the team. So you've got a new season ahead of him. They've made some big acquisition, the likes of Tonali from Newcastle, the likes of Fernandes from West Ham. There've also been talks of Tottenham getting two Man City players, Mamouche and Savino. And also defensively, they've reinforced Van Dijk from Brighton FC. So yeah, they looking revamped Tottenham, one could say. So let's look into the De Zerbi experiment. So looking into the De Zerbi system from these days at Brighton, and of course towards end of last season, where you could see the intention. His teams, they like to play from the back and need comfortable and technical players, inviting press, and they would be able to then play in and around between the opposition channels. So let's get into it. Yeah, this is potentially one of the most fascinating technical experiments of the six. Disable football is about creating numerical advantages. It's about tempting opponents to press, then playing through that pressure. As I mentioned, they invite the opposition to come and look for the ball, and once opposition presses up high, they then play through the median or the channels. The goalkeeper becomes very part of the build-up. Centre backs become playmakers, hence the signing of Van Dijk from Brighton FC. Midfielders constantly look for passing angles. You've got two signings familiar with the English Premier League, Tonali and Fernandes from West Ham. And suddenly, the opposition press becomes the opportunity. A possible 4-2-3-1 can become 3-2-4-1 information, really, in position rather. So we've got a three-man defense, two midfielders with four attacking players supported by a lone striker. So in this case, one of the fullbacks join into midfield to make a midfield double pivot, and then one of the midfielders pushes up to be a double number 10. So in terms of personnel, this is how the system looks on paper. But for the players that Tottenham have at this point, you are looking at guys like Mohamed Kudus when he's fully fit, and James Madison playing in that twin number 10 roles. And of course, you can have either of the new signing Tonali was Fernandes playing as double pivot and then pushing Pedro Porro, the Spain winning right back, up front to play from the right side of the attack. So the system really can vary depending on when the opponent allows. But in terms of the structure, one fullback moves inside, as I mentioned. You then have a three-man defense, and the other provide width. So most likely, Pedro Porro would be the one expected to provide the width from the right hand side, with Udige maybe being the more defensive minded. And then the midfield creates the platform. As I mentioned, James Madison, most likely when he's fit, together with Mohamed Kudus, would be the ideal number 10 or ideal players to play number 10. Not forgetting the guy who was injured for a while, Kulveseski. He's back from injury. He can also play in that number 10 role. So attacking players occupy the space between the opposition defenders and midfield lines. But there's a risk for that. If you invite the opposition to press for you, you have to be technically excellent. So you're expecting Van Hijk from his Brighton days to be technically sound from a defensive perspective, when to receive the ball, how to receive the ball, when to pass under pressure, first touch should be excellent, and the goalkeeper as well. So one bad pass, one poor first touch, one wrong decision, and we're exposed. That's why Tottenham could be brilliant one weekend and incredibly vulnerable the next. So if Spurs can master De Zerbi's build-up principle, they could become one of the most technical teams in the league, in my view. So yeah, that's Tottenham in the face of coach Robert De Zerbi. So in closing, you can just sum up each of the six teams. Arsenal, continuity, positional control, and defensive stability. Man City, a new position identity under Enzo Maresca, and Liverpool, aggressive pressing and vertical transactions to be expected. Chelsea, flexible positional football would be the rule of law under Xabi Alonso. Man United, midfield balance and attacking freedom under Michael Carrick. Tottenham, build-up football and positional rotations under Robert De Zerbi. So here is my big question, tactical question for the season. Can the new managers improve their teams without losing what made these elite clubs in the first place? Because this Premier League season isn't simply going to be about formation. It's going to be about identity, who control the space, who control transition better, who can press, who can play through the pressure, and who can adapt when playing A does not work out. This is what we're going to find out. I'm Lloyd. This is Talking Tactics with Lloyd. If you enjoy analysis, technical analysis, Premier League breakdowns, and football from a South African perspective, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification. Let me know in the comments which of the six teams has the best tactical system going into the new Premier League season. Until next time, keep watching the game differently. This is Talking Tactics with Lloyd. Thank you.